Autumn, 1347. 12 Genoese galleys slip into the Sicilian port of Messina. They carry silk and spices from the east, along with an invisible passenger. On the decks, sailors lie dying. Their bodies are warped by fever, with agonizing black swellings emerging at their joints. Terrified locals attempt to force the ships back out to sea, but the effort comes too late. The pathogen has already stepped ashore. This single maritime arrival acts as a catalyst. Within 6 years, the resulting pandemic will claim up to half of the European population. The pathogen lands in a society that has reached its ecological limit. Europe is trapped in a Malthusian crisis. A population explosion over the previous centuries has vastly outpaced the land's ability to produce food. The climate then shifts. The onset of the Little Ice Age brings colder, wetter weather that rots harvests, culminating in a great famine that starves millions between 1315 and 1317. Up to 90% of the surviving population are rural peasants, much like the laborer in this 14th century illustration. They live with chronic malnutrition, leaving their immune systems severely compromised. By the time the ships dock in Messina, the biological and structural defenses of the continent have already been hollowed out from within. To find where this threat actually begins, we have to look back to 1338, deep in the mountains of Central Asia. In 2022, researchers studied a pair of 14th century cemeteries near Lake Issyk-Kul in modern Kyrgyzstan. Gravestones there describe a sudden, mysterious pestilence. Geneticists sequenced DNA extracted from the victim's teeth. Inside, they found the ancestral strain of the Yersinia pestis bacterium, proving the disease crossed directly from local wild marmots into the human population. This localized spillover happens directly along the Silk Road, perfectly positioning the bacteria to hitch a ride on the expanding, interconnected trade networks of the Mongol Empire. The bacteria creeps westward with merchant caravans until 1346, when it reaches the trading port of Kaffa on the Black Sea. The city is under siege by the Mongol Golden Horde. As the plague ravages their own camps, the horde loads infected corpses into trebuchets and hurls them over the city walls. Genoese merchants abandon the doomed city and escape by sea. Unknowingly, they act as the maritime vectors that will soon dock in Messina. An active biological warfare, combined with global shipping routes, turns a regional outbreak into a continent-spanning pandemic. Once inside a human host, the primary bubonic strain of the disease attacks the lymph nodes. Without treatment, it kills roughly 60% of those infected. This diagram illustrates how the bacteria attacks the body. While the bubonic strain targets the lymph nodes, 2 deadlier mutations emerge. The pneumonic strain infects the lungs, and the septicemic strain attacks the bloodstream. Both are nearly 100% fatal. We now know that infected rats and their fleas aren't the only culprits. The extreme speed of the inland spread is driven by human-to-human transmission, fueled by respiratory droplets and human body lice. 14th century physicians have no concept of germs or vectors. They rely on the Galenic theory of miasma, believing the disease is caused by corrupted air and an imbalance of bodily humors. Because the medical establishment lacks any understanding of the biological vector, every remedy they prescribe is entirely useless. The resulting death toll is staggering. Between 30 and 50 million people perish in a matter of years. The civic and social contract disintegrates. Villages are abandoned. Victims are hastily thrown into mass graves, and the authority of the church shatters as clergy members die alongside their parishioners. The scale of the mortality dismantled the basic functions of the medieval state, leaving the psychological foundations of the social order in ruins. But out of this structural collapse, new civic defenses emerge. In 1377, the Adriatic port city of Ragusa, modern-day Dubrovnik, mounts the first organized state-mandated resistance. The city council passes legislation requiring all incoming ships and travelers to isolate on nearby islands for 30 days, a period known as the Trentina. This isolation period is later extended to 40 days, the Quarantina. Ragusa constructs dedicated permanent plague hospitals, like the stone courtyards of the lazarettos, to process and disinfect incoming cargo. By separating the sick from the healthy based on empirical observation, Ragusa establishes the direct administrative blueprint for modern global public health. The demographic collapse also triggers an economic revolution. With half the workforce gone, labor becomes a scarce and highly valuable resource. This chart demonstrates the sudden inversion of power. As the population line plunges, the cost of labor sharply spikes. Surviving peasants use this leverage to demand higher wages and lower rents from their lords. The landowning elites panic. In 1351, the English Parliament passes the Statute of Labourers, a legal attempt to freeze wages at pre-plague levels and force peasants to stay on their land. But legislation cannot stop market forces. Landlords secretly offer higher pay to harvest their rotting crops, and class tensions eventually erupt in the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. While the landed elite fought to preserve the old order, they could not ignore the new market reality. Over the following decades, the rigid ties of serfdom dissolved, making way for a labor market defined by negotiation and cash wages. This 14th century catastrophe remains a definitive record of human suffering, yet it also marks the point where necessity forced a total reorganization of Western society. It exposes the fatal vulnerabilities of an overcrowded, stagnant society, while forcing adaptations in economics, medicine, and governance. The modern standards of economic mobility and public health that we rely on today began as desperate survival mechanisms during Europe's darkest decade.